unexpected global success of the Fellowship of the Ring
It just pierced pop consciousness.
had fans and critics putting to bed the idea that Tolkien's sprawling trilogy couldn't be translated onto the silver screen.
Everyone was saying, this is exactly what I wanted it to be.
But was everybody getting ahead of themselves?
What do you suppose that means?
After all, there were two more in the trilogy.
Two halflings.
Not halflings, films.
The Two Towers.
The Return of the King.
The question was, would the Fellowship of the Ring be a one-hit wonder?
Can they do it again?
And then again.
Yes. I wish that.
There was always a concern about keeping the stakes high and keeping people interested.
And so Peter Jackson put his faith in Weta Digital to take The Two Towers and Return of the King to a whole new level.
They were really, really under pressure. We're going to actually make you feel like you're living in this world more than before.
But as the number of visual effects shots grew from hundreds into thousands,
Gollum, Helm Steep.
You've got orcs and trolls, Namakil, horses, so many visual effects.
So just the volume of VFX work, kind of overwhelming.
despite groundbreaking homegrown innovations,
we can push a button and these little characters will go and fight each other.
the only thing more dramatic than the effects on screen was the drama behind the scenes at Weta Digital.
Evil kind of backstabby kind of poison.
Found out that about half of them were going to leave. It became clear to Peter and Fran that they had to make a change.
When does it finish? When do I see if I'm going to be sued?
Weta Digital was a visual effects facility in Wellington which got its start in Heavenly Creatures by Peter.
A fairly small group of guys.
In this, garage, with a few computers. Yeah, kind of insane.
Being located in New Zealand, sort of isolated, they needed to do a lot of that CGI work on their own. They didn't have access to Industrial Light and Magic or any of the other big Hollywood special effects companies.
But for Peter, it wasn't just about physical distance. It was about being able to control his vision.
Peter wanted to have control on every single aspect of the production process.
However, at this point, Peter Jackson wasn't a movie-making machine.
It got really hard at times, and there were periods that were very difficult.
Between movies, it was swords and sandals that kept the lights on in Wellington, thanks to long-running TV series Xena and Hercules, both shot in New Zealand.
They learned from Hercules and Xena. Things had to get done and done fast. And
everything had to be as perfect as you could get it.
For Jackson's next feature, The Frighteners, Weta would need to stretch.
The Frighteners had a lot of visual effects in it.
We needed to up our game, a lot more people involved.
Beyond New Zealand, beyond even Hollywood, and all the way to New York.
Take one. Hi, I'm Charlie McClellan. I came down to New Zealand on The Frighteners.
Charlie's initiation into New Zealand culture came with its own frightening experience.
When I first stepped off the plane and onto my first film set, and there was these two long-haired guys, no shoes, coming up the hill, carrying sandbags and sticks. It was the director and the DP. I realized that as far as the filmmaking process, that was really an all-hands-on-deck kind of mind frame.
Charlie was no computer whiz, but he knew how to streamline operations.
I was basically the post-production supervisor. I didn't really know anything about visual effects and didn't really have a particular interest in computer effects. As we started working, it became more clear that the visual effects side of it needed shape and management. Peter basically just said, Charlie, kind of go that way.
The Frighteners failed to land gracefully with audiences.
The Frighteners belly flopped.
Son of a bitch!
But thanks to Weta's effects, The company, named after a New Zealand native insect, was getting noticed in Hollywood, with executive producer Robert Zemeckis hiring Weta Digital again in 1997 for his film, Contact.
Whatever it is, it ain't local.
But another project was. It just happened to be the biggest movie project in history, and Weta Digital was completely unprepared.
The recruiting process was one where we had to basically go from 40 people to 250 people within a matter of 6 months. It was clearly ambitious and maybe even at that stage a little bit outside of our realm of possibility.
If Weta had doubts, Lord of the Rings backers New Line Cinema had serious concerns.
New Line was worried about Weta, about their capacity to deliver.
We're just these kids really from the other side of the planet going, yeah, we think we can do this.
Unfortunately for New Line, Peter Jackson's deal with them meant that Weta Digital were a lock to complete all the visual effects. And with Auckland, New Zealand, 6,500 miles away from Hollywood, there was not a lot that New Line could do about it, except hope for the best. Weta expanded rapidly. So much so, it was starting to step on some powerful toes.
We had designed all of our rendering to be done in RenderMan, basically, which was a Pixar product. We had just put in a purchase order for, I think it was 500 RenderMan licenses. The phone rang, and it was the woman from Pixar. And she was saying that Steve was really angry at me. This is Steve Jobs for trying to steal his employees and that they're not gonna sell us RenderMan. And I was like, what? You can't do that. The next thing you know, I'm talking to Steve Jobs and he's calling me a punk and he's saying, you know, trying to steal his people and kicking this punk down in New Zealand. And I was literally just holding the phone away from my ear, just going, this is not happening.
Even with all the software in the world, Weta would have to go fast and grow fast at the same time.
A lot of the production pipelines were still being worked out, and there was a lot of inventing how we were going to do this.
One of those inventions would come from a man who had been pondering a problem in visual effects since The Frighteners.
I was a technical director on The Frighteners. I created some software for various things that couldn't be done with the off-the-shelf software at the time. So when we had a wrap party for The Frighteners, Peter asked me if I'd be interested in putting together a crowd system.
Meaning a computer-generated crowd far exceeding the capabilities of living, breathing humans.
To do these giant battle scenes, you know, they couldn't get that many extras because that would be insurmountable amount of people.
Doing it with computers was only half the solution.
I've got a $40,000 computer, and yet I'm laboriously posing this character almost frame by frame, and I thought, there's got to be another way to do this.
For Stephen, the dream solution arrived, conveniently enough, in a dream.
I had a dream about this where I came to work one day and there was these guys from somewhere else.
He means aliens.
And they were showing off this system. And the system had like a forest in it and animals and all kinds of things all running around. It was all real time and they were all alive. They each had a little brain and they were each interacting and responding to what they could see and hear and feel. And I asked them how it worked and they showed me. And it was this connections of nodes for brains, and that was my vision from there. The guys in that dream showed me how to do it.
The resulting software was christened Massive.
I spent 2 years making it, and then I took it along to Weta. We did a test simulation.
What they were seeing was only stick figures, but they were stick figures with brains.
And we can push a button and these little characters will go and fight each other.
Stephen's little blue men may have had brains, but they weren't making the best decisions.
Stephen would do his crowd simulations and he would drop his characters onto the landscape, and instead of going and fighting each other, they'd all turn around and run the other direction.
They had to reprogram the software because there were too many of the massive guys looking to go, this is not worth it, I'm running away.
So all I had to do was put in another rule that said if you can't see any enemies, turn around.
Although it wasn't a quick process.
To get it to actually work took years and years, and so that was a long process.
But there was one Lord of the Rings character whose birth would turn Weta into a household name. And his arrival was going to be a very difficult labor.
With humanesque and humanoid characters like Gollum, we always thought that we would get a much more believable and perhaps a high throughput result by using motion capture. And the motion capture that we were getting back then was very rudimentary. You know, cutting edge for its time, but it was buggy, it was unwieldy, it was difficult to kind of get that motion data out and into something that normal artists who deal with a model can put together and make sense of. And so a lot of times you were trying to simplify the camera moves so that the unwieldy motion capture data that comes in can be made sense of in a clean and simple way.
The developing technology had the potential to be scarily good, and that was scaring its users.
There was a great schism between the animators and the motion capture people. You could see that the animators were thinking that their jobs were going to be threatened in the long term. From my point of view, it was always going to be a marriage between the two. We were going to need to take the best of everything that all of it had to offer and use it as could be afforded.
Things started to come together.
The massive animation software was starting to work. The fell beasts were starting to flap their wings and look evil. So you could start to see the early stages of the possibility of it.
But cracking the code to create animated creatures was proving easier than managing the people doing it.
There wasn't a huge amount of people working on the management side of things. John Shields was the digital effects producer. John Labrie was the chief technical officer. So the three of us were kind of the main people running the company. I feel like I was sort of the general manager, the visual effects producer, the human resources lead shrink, lead legal counsel.
And for Charlie, it was all becoming too much, especially on New Line's tight budget.
We literally were drip-fed every step of the way. It was a very tight leash and very stressful because this was like a high-stakes financial gamble that everybody was kind of immersed in.
But the leash was becoming so tight, management could hardly breathe, and Weta was about to choke.
Fran came to me and said that one of the key people at Weta was going to resign.
Lord of the Rings producer Barry Osborne had a problem. Weta Digital seemed to be shooting itself in the foot.
Fran came to me and said that one of the key people at Weta was going to resign, and his name was John Labrie. So I called John and said, "John, why are you leaving Weta?" And he said, "Well, I'm the chief technical officer, and I designed the pipelines and put them all into place. And I think I've done the job I was hired to do." But it was clear to me he was holding back. And I found out that there was a lot of dysfunction at Weta.
This was a problem that Barry needed to solve with good old analog technology.
We put a big whiteboard up and we said, okay, here are the functions that needed to be done. And we asked Charlie to designate who was doing each of these functions. And Charlie said he was doing all of them. And then it got a little bit contentious between Charlie and John Labrie, and there were a lot of people they were going to leave.
A mass desertion was threatening to stop the Lord of the Rings in its tracks. So big changes were made regarding John Shields and Charlie McClellan.
They were both inexperienced on a film of the scale, and it wasn't really that. I think they both may have been able to do the job, but they were very arrogant.
Well, for me, it was not instantly kind of accepted as being the solution to our problems. There was a lot of resistance.
Charlie and John were shown the door.
To be honest, a lot of the things that challenged me were probably just my own naive dreams and hopes that it could be a different way. That kind of rot and evil kind of backstabby kind of poison that will infect any company that gets to a certain size, let's face it. So I got into the business to learn how to make movies, and I never got into it to be a manager of hundreds of people.
I was lucky to get Joe Lettieri to run Weta, and he's still with the company, and he's partnered now in the company, and he's done a great job. And then we also hired Eileen Moran, so she was a good person to smooth things over and to run the company, and it was
really worked successfully.
Weta now had the software and the management. But many of its new staff understood code more than they did cameras.
I realised that they didn't understand my film talk. You know, a computer guy is saying, how do I get that in frame? I said, oh, jib down. Like, what are you talking about? So I took them to a grip workshop and put them on dollies and cranes and showed them this is what happened when the camera actually moves, you know, and you've got to try and replicate this feel.
But it wasn't all doom and gloom. The motion capture issues that plagued Charlie McClellan had been fixed, meaning this could now be transformed into this.
What Weta was doing felt like it was miles ahead of everybody else.
Master's my friend.
Some of Gollum's most memorable moments owed little to Tolkien's book.
You don't have any friends. Not listening.
And this scene owed little to even Peter Jackson.
So in the first iconic scene where Smeagol is talking to himself, it's actually directed by Fran.
Wicked, tricksy, fierce.
That part is not even in the books. That is something created by Fran and Philippa and Peter. And it just adds so much more dimension to the internal struggle of the character of Smeagol.
Despite all the computer trickery, Gollum's struggle could not have been more human.
He was a real performance. This thing that was obviously, it came out of a computer, but it had a soul, and you were moved by it.
That was thanks to the talents of a one-man circus.
Well, Andy Serkis was a theater actor, and he was like a Shakespearean-like theater actor.
Who nearly didn't take the role.
His mate told him in London, dude, I would not touch that. Because nobody had really kind of heard of Peter Jackson besides Howling Creatures, and unless you were in the indie film scene, nobody kind of knew who he was.
But that didn't stop Andy, who agreed to give Gollum a unique and unmistakable voice.
Master betrayed us. Bleeded out.
And he just thought he was gonna just get into recording booths, say some lines, and that be it. Once he comes down and sees the technology, he basically volunteered to give performances on set for the actors.
Andy didn't hold back in throwing himself into the role.
The scenes when Gollum is actually, throwing himself down that river getting a fish. I was on set for that day and he actually did throw himself down the river getting that fish, and it was amazing he didn't hurt himself.
Funnily enough, Andy wasn't precious.
That was the beginning of that lifelong journey that Andy has undertaken.
And his heroics benefited more than Gollum.
There was something to photograph, that's one side of it, and then the actors had someone to play with. Elijah and Gollum were actually there in the room together for all intents and purposes.
And so what they would do is they would do a Gollum pass where they would shoot the scene with Andy for the actors, and then they would go back, take him out, and he would just say the lines off set.
It was such a process that Andy's agent probably should have asked for triple the fee.
Everything he did had to be done 3 times. He had to do it on the set, and then he had to come back and do more intricate capture for the CG, and then he had to do it again for ADR. As many actors have to do, but he had to do it for everything.
But for Weta's Warlocks, it was hardly enough time to digitally develop what Andy Serkis had given them.
I'm sure there was a lot of pressure on them.
There was still a lot of work to put elements into those shots and to final them.
In the depths of Miramar, Wellington, Weta Digital, after a sneak peek of Gollum in Fellowship of the Ring, were busy preparing for his full-scale debut in the 2 Towers.
Well, obviously Gollum was figured in the second and third films in a much bigger way.
Meanwhile, Peter was a little bit distracted, looking backwards rather than forwards, thanks to the success of the Fellowship of the Ring.
He was able to get additional funding for the DVD versions, which are his preferred versions.
So Peter decided to put the finishing touches on the film that was already finished.
They were able to relook at stuff and go, hey, we can actually make this better.
There were lists made throughout the shooting time. The script supervisor would keep a list from Peter of things that they felt needed to be reshot or pickups that needed to be added.
Additions such as the extended introduction of hobbits at the beginning of the film.
Hobbits have been living and farming in the 4 farthings of the Shire for many hundreds of years.
And then there was the lengthening of Galadriel's gift scene to include other members of the Fellowship.
And for you, Samwise Gamgee, elven rope made of heath lime.
There was also a humorous addition as Sam listened to the elves lament Gandalf's demise.
The finest rockets ever seen. They burst in stars of blue and green.
That doesn't do them justice by a long rope.
And to help the poetry go down, a touch of a cappella from Aragorn.
Who is she?
All inserted on Jackson's whim, but Peter's desire to perfect his work in progress was seriously impacting progress on Part 2 of the trilogy. The Two Towers was already undershot and behind schedule.
6 months worth of pickups.
Flashback scene in the Two Towers with Boromir heading off to Rivendell. That was not originally there, so they did bring Sean Bean in to do those reshoots.
This city was once the jewel of our kingdom.
The Witch King, they had a new helmet design, so that was also a pickup shot.
With time ticking away, New Line attempted to exert some dominance.
Then there was a question of where we were going to dub the film. New Line said we can't dub the film in New Zealand, that we have to go to Australia. Australia has all the better equipment and all the latest technology, and New Zealand doesn't have anything. And Peter obviously didn't want to do that. I said, why don't we have our mixers go over to Australia and then come back and look at New Zealand, and let's weigh up the pros and cons.
Suddenly, Barry had a mutiny on his hands.
New Line post supervisor is saying that if we don't vote to do it in Australia, we'll never work again. So I just blew up, and we ultimately prevailed.
And as the premiere for The Two Towers came closer, more audio problems presented themselves about orcs.
I'm gonna rip at you, filthy little idiots!
They were literally a day and a half away from the premiere, and they realised they had to ADR these characters. We were in New Zealand. To get us on a plane, to get us to the UK, we wouldn't have got there in time.
Come here!
This scene in the Fangorn forest needed several new voices.
Put a maggot hole in your belly.
But there was only one man for the job.
Andy was in the booth. Yeah, he did all 7 characters.
With a little help, of course.
Where I did the voice down the line, and then he was able to mimic that. Of all the people to do it, though, he was the one. There wouldn't be a better voice actor on the planet.
The Two Towers entered cinemas on December the 18th, 2002.
When Two Towers came out, I was already blown away by the first one, so I was very much expecting it to be beautiful.
It ramped things up to even a different level of, I think, response and mania, and on top of that, the Battle of Helm's Deep, which if you saw that in a movie theater with an audience, that was a rock concert. That was just awesome to sit through.
But as you'll remember, the battle to make the Battle of Helm's Deep was an intense struggle unto itself.
The worst, most difficult, impossible shoot that anyone's ever done.
Yeah, I definitely felt a sense of pride for that.
Everybody who's tried to imitate it hasn't done as well, like Game of Thrones. This epic size, this incredible scale. When you look at Helm's Deep, it's not forgetting who they are. They don't become cogs in a machine. They don't become just more cannon fodder. They're still themselves, and each of their qualities is what helps them win this battle.
And it showed the world that Lord of the Rings was getting better and better instead of resting on their laurels.
It was proof that they could do this thing. They could do it twice. They could turn the stakes up. They could make it even cooler.
The Battle of Helm's Deep may have been the centerpiece of The Two Towers, but it was the quieter struggles of a truly singular character that really took their breath away.
And I think Gollum was a different level. He drove the audience absolutely crazy.
Became like a digital character that's actually like a real living thing, not just a sort of, digital puppet or two-dimensional. It's like, wow, you really feel like Gollum's there with them.
It was kind of a little kind of a looking glass into the future of how we were going to create creatures.
The triumph of The Two Towers was complete, but the trilogy still had its final chapter.
Which then set the stage for a full year of, oh my God, is Return of the King gonna kill us? Like, is this it?
The Return of the King would be the crown on Hollywood's most expensive and groundbreaking trilogy.
There's so much pressure on Return of the King to wrap this up perfectly because the first two were so good and so well received.
Hail the victorious!
But would audiences still care enough to embrace the last film? 3 years deep into a very deep dive on Tolkien.
There was always a concern about keeping the stakes high and keeping people interested.
Peter and Fran considered how to conclude their epic.
End of Two Towers, the beginning of Return of the King, was always a tricky thing where they were constantly debating, this material belong here? Does it belong here? Does it go in any movie? There's so many things that just dramatically kept moving, involving the breaking points of these films.
With 1 year until the final release, Peter Jackson was running out of runway to bring his magnum opus into land.
God, I don't think he ever thinks anything's finished, really. There's always other stuff he wants to do. Another idea, oh, we could do something better, oh, can we just quickly reshoot that? All the time, right up until the last day.
But The Lord of the Rings was no longer something its perfectionist director could control completely. Stars like Liv Tyler started to flex their muscles, or at least their lips.
Yeah, the Aragorn and Arwen kiss she was supposed to kiss a stunt double because he had already been wrapped for the day. And then Liv was like, but Viggo's like my guy. I don't want to kiss a stunt double. So they got Viggo to come back so they could kiss. And it's a great kiss, by the way, but she was very sad that they actually thought it was gonna be fine because he had the full beard and who's gonna know, it's just a kiss.
Oh, you'd be surprised what people notice. For some in the audience, their eyes were firmly drawn to the smooth, fine features of one particular elf.
From the first film, there's a young Kiwi chap whose name I should remember.
Here's a reminder.
It's this quite pretty elven character who had 2 seconds on screen.
The guy on the right.
If you watch it on a plane, he's not in the movie at all. He gets framed out for the square monitors there.
He was just playing an elf, an unnamed elf.
Nonetheless, this unnamed elf would not remain anonymous for long.
Turns out it was Brett McKenzie from Flight of the Conchords.
Brett McKenzie.
But the musical comedy duo were virtually unknown in 2001. So the internet went right ahead and christened its favorite elf.
Fans had picked up on this particular character and given him a name. In the fan base, he'd become more of a character.
He was named Figwit. From the acronym, Frodo is great, who is that?
And they made like this joke website, and then someone else made another website, and then another one.
Figwit was going viral and taking the Lord of the Rings with him.
It was this really cool, like, early internet communities coming together and making something that was theirs that became, part of the Lord of the Rings folklore to the point where in the Return of the King they actually cast Brett McKenzie with a speaking role.
We cannot delay. My lady!
It was really cool to see that, the fans could actually influence the final product and, really be part of that shared culture.
But to really satisfy the fans, Peter needed the Return of the King's main event, the final battle over the ring, to be massive. It was time to deploy his not-so-secret weapon.
The massive department.
The team of computer animators using Stevens' massive software for the trilogy's most massive battle.
200,000 agents.
Agents, meaning computer-animated combatants.
The riders of Rohan, 50,000 coming down the hill. They wanted them to form like a wedge. Rather than constrain them to a wedge, we thought, let's get them to make the wedge themselves.
To make that happen, the massive software issued the army's marching orders by code.
So each rider had a rule that told them, if you're on the right of Theoden, then you want to lag behind the guy who's on your left. And if you're on the left of him, you want to lag behind the guy who's on your right, so that they naturally formed this wedge. I mean, I don't mean to sound like I'm blowing my trumpet.
Oh, go on.
But it looked fantastic.
You didn't just have this big wide field of all this fighting, but you knew that your actors were central, so you focused on the cast as well as the action.
On this, the final stage, The key players would have their defining moments with a hobbit.
Didn't think it would end this way.
Wizard.
Death is just another path.
Dwarf.
The best dwarf wins!
Or man.
Ready to leave!
Or woman. And of course, the elves.
They wanted to add like a grander Legolas fight for Return of the King than the Two Towers. And so that's where the elephant kind of segment came in.
But by 2003, the success of Rings had made its cast in demand. Barry had a problem.
We had a problem with Orlando because he was in Troy, and they didn't want to release Orlando to us. That was a problem. Thankfully, I had a good friend that was on Troy, and it was clear to both of us that it wouldn't conflict with Troy at all. He could release him, and we could get him back to their film without a problem.
That's how Orlando Bloom ended up back on the Lord of the Rings conveyor belt.
For the slide down the trunk, he was on a conveyor belt, and just went whoop, and hopped off at the end. But it looked kind of cool, and it was kind of a nice sort of callback to the surfing down the stairs on the shield.
Peter Jackson continued to pursue every opportunity to perfect the finishing touches on his masterwork, making so many last-minute changes, only he knew the score, even when it came to the score.
I got a call one night from Howard Shore, the composer, and he was in despair. He said, I just walked off of the scoring stage, and Peter came over to me and said he had just recut the scene that I scored. I have to recompose the music and then go back to the scoring stage and rescore it. You know how long that takes me. How are we ever going to finish the movie?
Which raised the question, when would the Lord of the Rings trilogy finally end?
Peter didn't want to let go of the film. He was so attached to the film, he didn't want to finish.
With the final premiere date fast approaching, the end has come. Something had to give. As the final installment of the Lord of the Rings trilogy neared completion,
we were right up against the deadline of having to deliver.
Hurry!
Barry Osborne found he had a big problem. His director.
Peter didn't want to let go of the film.
Peter Jackson's obsession was becoming all-consuming.
The ring is my burden.
Ironically, his dedication was becoming a burden to the production.
And when you deliver a big international film of this scale, there are a lot of deals that are made with merchandising and tie-ins, and all those deals count on you delivering the film on time. And if you don't, you perhaps sacrifice some of that. And that's a lot of money at stake.
And obviously, he had to get it done in advance for us to be able to dub the film, because we were doing worldwide. So we had to get it around the world, and we had to have people dubbing it, subtitling it. All that stuff takes time.
So Barry hatched a plan that might upset the apple cart.
Because I think he thought I was trying to sabotage him.
In order to save the apples.
In reality, I was buying him more time by coming up with this system.
The system was all about guaranteeing on-time delivery.
What we did is I made a grid. Rows were the departments, and the columns were reels, 1 through, I think, 12. It may have been 14 reels. I can't remember how many reels it was. It was a long film. And then we'd have a matrix, and you can say, oh, it looks like reel 5 is probably close to being done. And so I would say to everybody, focus all your attention on completing reel 5 so that we could deliver reels out of order, which would let Peter do whatever he was doing and buy him new time. We could still make our delivery date because we were able to finish reels out of sequence.
Barry's system worked, and The Return of the King was delivered in time to premiere in Hollywood. No, scratch that, in Cannes. Oh, no, wait a minute.
Peter Jackson said quite rightly, we need to premiere this in New Zealand.
Not just in New Zealand, but in Wellington, now often called Wellywood, the home of the Lord of the Rings.
It was like a homecoming. It wasn't just for a film. It was like a national event. It was this pride.
Wellington pretty much closed down for the premieres. You know, the red carpet going down Courtney Place towards the embassy.
All the stars are there saying hello and signing autographs and getting selfies done and all that.
The last red carpet seemed as long as the road that led to it.
100,000 people in the city that I worked in, the longest red carpet in history, and getting to walk that in front of a whole lot of people that I'd been a theatre actor in front of, it doesn't get any better than that.
Very exciting to be a part of.
It was also beautiful to watch Peter and Fran and to see their pride in everything they had accomplished in their home.
We made the movie, but you guys have given us the party. And we thank you very, very much for that.
And I've often said to people, if I had to stop acting tomorrow, the fact that I got to do that, I would feel satisfied.
Also satisfied was The Ring's many dedicated fans.
When Return of the King came out, fans were over the moon because we've invested for so many years. We've invested for so many hours. And everything's paid off. And also, I think that final scene where Aragorn says, "My friends, you bow to no one." I still get choked up even talking about that scene.
You bow to no one.
The Lord of the Rings took its final bow. But was this really the end of The Lord of the Rings?
The only critique I remember hearing is that it had several endings. I'm okay with that because everyone's story doesn't end at the same time.
However it was deemed to end, the end result was a box office smash. The Return of the King hauled in more than $1 billion worldwide.
Credit to Peter, he kept the intimacy. He had a way of keeping the epic scale of that which is Rings humbled in a way that feels like you're being told a story at bedtime by a loved one.
The Return of the King obviously buttoned not only the story, but the whole journey for so many of us. We put a mark in the ground of what that genre could attain to.
The fantasy epic had come of age with The Lord of the Rings, but there was one final accolade that would confirm its landmark status.
It's not necessarily that you're the best film and the other ones are crap. They're all good films, and it's just it's the right time for your whatever movie you made.
The 76th Oscars confirmed The Lord of the Rings' time had come.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King.
The Return of the King brought home a record equaling 11 Oscars, including Best Director for Peter Jackson.
Wow, look, thank you so much for the Academy and for all else. You're giving us an incredibly overwhelming night.
There were technical wins too.
It felt fantastic to win an Academy Award. I just felt like I now was special in the visual effects community. It was just lovely.
And as for Best Picture, well, finally Return of the King took a fantasy film where no fantasy film had been before.
Where are we going?
And the Oscar goes to... It's a clean sweep. The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, Barry M. Osborne, Peter Jackson, and Fran Walsh producers.
Return of the King had won in every single category it was nominated.
It does not belong to one man, but to all.
Look what we all got. Everyone's sort of looking at themselves in disbelief. What have I just won? Sorry, what is it? Keep looking at it saying, is that really mine?
For Peter, Fran, and for Barry, it had taken 3 films and 7 years, but realizing their dream had changed Hollywood.
Peter went from being an indie filmmaker to like the next George Lucas.
I don't even think you can measure the impact that Lord of the Rings had on commercial filmmaking. They were a proof of concept for so many different things, and so many filmmakers have taken up the challenge that Peter Jackson laid down since then.
I'm so honored, touched, and relieved that the Academy and the members of the Academy that have supported us have seen past the trolls and the wizards and the hobbits and are recognizing fantasy this year.
For Lord of the Rings, fantasy was very much a B genre.
They won all of those Oscars. That solidified that genre film was a valid form of art.
It made people realize that fantasy wasn't just a genre on the fringes. It was mainstream.
It's time to celebrate.
But even with the party now officially in full swing, and Oscars literally in hand, Peter Jackson had not finished with The Lord of the Rings. Peter Jackson, despite the accolades from his peers, was still at heart a perfectionist. And he was not done with The Lord of the Rings.
After he won the Oscars, he came back and they were filming more pickup shots for the DVD. He's like, I'm still shooting things for a film that's already done and won Oscars. We're still adding more stuff to it.
The trilogy had seen technology finally catch up with Tolkien's imagination.
5 years prior to us doing Lord of the Rings, the software and the development of CG would not have made it possible to make those films as authentic as they are.
And we'll be the master.
I think Gollum alone is one of the most influential film characters of all time because of the way audiences connected to him emotionally. It proved you could do it.
It also proved the digital effects were not just a better form of decoration. They had a place at the very center of motion picture storytelling.
It could have only been done on those 3 shows because it was such a pressure pot.
I think a lot of the technology that we use today owes a lot to that time.
The DIY filmmaker from New Zealand, who once baked his own latex props in his mother's oven, had helped usher in a new digital era.
Even though there were big financial limitations, from where we were sitting as Kiwis, we had the world at our feet.
Peter Jackson turned out to be the perfect person for it, even though, you know, even I was a little skeptical when he was signed to do it. But, you know, it's a happy Hollywood ending.
But not for all.
Lord of the Rings, creatively, immeasurably successful. I think on the financial side, while we do measure it as a success, it is also a success that broke a studio.
That's right. Broke a studio.
New Line overspent on things and became a company that didn't know what they were anymore.
Because emboldened by his success with the Rings trilogy, Bob Shaye placed another $200 million plus bet on a second hoped-for fantasy franchise.
Is that all? Whimpering cub!
But the Golden Compass was pointing in the wrong direction, and New Line's losses proved fatal.
New Line never recovered. New Line was never New Line again.
The company that Freddie built and Hobbits minted was swallowed.
Warner Brothers acquired New Line.
But the story of Bob Shaye's renegade company and Tolkien's Hobbits was not over yet. In fact, it was just beginning.
There's room for a little more.
However, the story New Line was telling did seem a little fishy.
New Line was creating this narrative. We didn't make a profit.
Creative bookkeeping. There were a lot of lawsuits.
So many lawsuits were filed. There were so many problems. There were so many people who wanted a piece of that enormous pie that was generated.
The difference between what they said they'd sold and what they actually had sold was quite big. And I think they thought we would just go away. And they said, you're never going to work in the industry again. You will be blacklisted forever.